Hello everybody, welcome to part 7 of my How to Make a Pokemon Game tutorial series. In this episode, we are going to look at event commands. We're going to talk about a lot of event conditions, and I'm going to talk about conditional branches. I'm going to talk about self-switches and variables. I'm going to talk about loops. I'm going to talk about a lot of event commands. So let's get into it right now. Without further ado, so you can see I changed the map around a little. Looks pretty snazzy. So, the first thing I want to talk about is event conditions. We last time looked at switches, right? So I have the chef here, and he turns test switch on, and he turns test switch off. So that's cool. We wanna use those switches to make things happen in our game. We wanna say, hey, when this switch is off, do this, but when the switch is on, do something else, right? So I've created a little test scenario right now to kind of preview this. It's really cool. So right now, when test switch is off, and I interact with this little shrub, it'll say off. If I talk to him, it says, hey, I'm the chef. I turn it on, now it says on, and it changes. So you can use this logic, which I will break down in a little bit. You can use this logic to, you can use your imagination as to why this is so awesome, but you can make things happen in your game based on switches, and it's amazing. You can do this with variables too, which I will show you in just a little bit. So, the way that I made this work is, on the first page, here's the little shrub guy, and he says off. And the way it works is, like I said before, when all the conditions are empty, that means this will always happen. So, this will always happen that he says off. Unless, now here's where it gets complicated. Now I go to the second event page. Boop. You can make a new event page always by clicking new event page in the top. You can copy event pages. Like, if you want to get super complex, you can start making a ton of event pages. But basically, on the second event page, it says, hey, if test switch is on, change his graphic to look like a full little tree, or a little shrub, whatever it's a berry plant, and print out the text on when you interact with him, player touch. So, the way that the logic works for events in this game is, the first page is the lowest priority, which is kind of confusing, it's kind of weird, but here's how it works. It checks to see if the second page is true, and if the second page is not true, then it executes what's on the first page. So if you have event page 3, 4, 5, if you have 5 event pages, it'll check to see if the conditions in page 5 are met. So, you can check lots of switches, you can check variables, which I still haven't broken down yet, and self-switches, which I love, which I haven't broken down yet either. But basically, it's important to notice, or it's important to pay attention to the order of operations here. If the conditions in page 5 are not met, it will check page 4. If the conditions in page 4 are not met, it will check page 3. If the conditions in page 3 are met, it will then execute everything here, and then end. But if 3 is not met, it will move to 2. If 2 is not met, it'll move to 1. And 1, it's a safe practice to always have something happen on 1 where there's no conditions. But if you wanted to, let's get rid of these crappy event pages. If you wanted to make it so that way something is either always going or never going, you can just do this. If test switch is on, you can just do one event page. I don't know if I'm being super clear right now, but basically, if you want to make it so that way something only appears when a switch is on, you can do that also with conditions. So if test switch is on, then let's put this camper here. And when you interact with him, he'll just say, yo. And he's fixed. Cool. So it'll check the first page and say, hey, if test switch is on, this guy's here. But if test switch is not on, he's just not here at all. Which is pretty cool too. You can do that if you want. Yo. So if I turn it off, he will disappear again. So you can use that to, make key NPCs in your game. You can use that to trigger a ton of stuff. You can use that for legendaries if you want a legendary to only appear when a certain switch condition has been met. It's amazing. So using conditions, you have the power to do a ton of stuff. So conditions, you can check switches, which we've talked about. You set them on or off. But you can also check variables. So let's look at variables now. Control variables. So a variable has a name, which you can, let me double click up here and then make my own variable. Holy crap. I'll make a new variable and I'll just call it new. variable, and then apply. Okay, cool. So new variable is our variable. And I never really used this batch thing. This allows you to modify multiple variables at once, but I don't use that. And then with the variable, you can do a whole bunch of operations. I don't really go too complex with them. I don't really multiply or divide or, mod. See, these are some complex stuff. You have the power to do it if you want, but you can. But what I primarily do is set, add, or subtract. So you can set a variable to be a certain number. You can add it. So like every time I beat a guy, I increase the number by 1. Every time this happens, subtract a number, subtract it by 1. Or increase it by 2. But traditionally, what I do for the most part when it comes to variables is I have a variable set, and then every time an action occurs, I increase it by 1. So I do add 1. And then once a certain threshold has been reached, so like on another event, I say, hey, if this variable is 5 or higher, do something. And then, you do it. You can also increase it by the count of another variable or a random int. If you set, this is kind of interesting if you want to have randomization in your game. You can do set random and then between 0 or to any number you set, or between 5 to whatever. You can set the numbers to be anything, but the random variables are pretty cool in tandem with another event that we'll look at shortly. You can also set a variable to be like how many of a certain item you have in your inventory. I never use that. Never use this, never use this, never use this. I never use any of these. Primarily you use constant and random, and add and subtract and set when you're using variables. So let's test it out. Let's make it so that way, let's make a new event. Am I doing that right now? Cool, I am. Let's make a new event where it'll say add var, and then it will increase a certain variable by 1. So every time you step on it, it'll increase new variable, add 1. Cool. So plus equals. I mean, if you've done programming and stuff. Okay, and then we'll make it player touch, and we'll make it look like this. Well, let's not make it look like that. Let's make it something like on the ground. Let's make it a little object ball, and let's make it so every time you interact with it, increases it. Cool. So every time you interact with this Pokeball on the ground, it will increase the variable by 1. And then let's make another new event where this thing conditionally will only show up if the new variable is 3 or above. So that means this tree will not appear until I interact with the ball 3 times. So you can use this for like battling someone 3 times or keeping track of how many times you've been to a certain place. So look, right now there's no tree. Add var, so it's been added once, twice, 3 times. Boom, and there's your tree, baby. So variables are cool. I primarily use variables for keeping track of how many of a certain specific, if there's a trainer that you want to allow people to retrain, and then after they've beaten that guy, I mean, not retrain, rebattle. For example, in Pokemon Noir, I had a guy who was called the Chansey Man, and he had a full team of Chanseys. And after you beat him a certain amount of times, he would level up, so his Chanseys would get harder, and they'd also give you an item. He gave you a lucky egg, I think. So after every time I beat him, I would increase the variable by 1. It was pretty cool, so I like variables. So you can use variables in your conditionals. And now, for my favorite little thing. So I talked about switches, I talked about variables, and now I'm going to talk about self-switches. So, switches are global. Switches can be checked on everything in the conditions. Self-switches are unique to that one event. There's one little exception where it's possible to edit self-switches with other things, but that's complicated, and I'll get into that way down the line. But for what you need to know right now is self-switches allow you to keep track of things for just one specific event, so you don't need to get super complex. So let's make it so that way there's a guy. Let's make it so it's Koga, and so the first page, no conditionals, and then when you talk to him, he'll say, "Yo, I'm Koga," in all caps. "Pleased to meet you," once again in all caps. And then it'll turn, so control self switch. So there are 4 self switches, A, B, C, and D. I really only have used A and B, maybe C once. The events don't really get much more complicated than that. I mean, if you can make an event more complicated than that, I applaud you, but hey. So self switch A on. So after you talk to him, he'll turn self switch A on. So that means that this event will have self-switch A on. So let's make a new event page and check. If self-switch A is on, let's make him still Koga. I forgot what number he was. Koga, you are trainer 63. Damn. So many trainer sprites to choose. Okay, cool. So, on the first page, what will always happen is he says, "Yo, I'm Koga, pleased to meet you," and then it'll turn self-switch A on. And then on the second page, it'll check and say, "Hey, if self-switch A is on," and remember the order, it'll check event page 2 and then page 1, so it'll go, "Hey, self-switch A is on now." When I talk to him, he'll say, "Hey, haven't we already met before?" Cool. So, I love self-switches. Self-switches are great to make sure an event only happens once. So, like, you talk to a guy and he gives you an item, and then you turn self-switch way on, and he says, "Hey, I already gave you the item." It's amazing. "Yo, I'm Koga, pleased to meet you." "Hey, haven't we already met before?" "Hey, haven't we already met before?" So self-switch A is on now. Isn't that great? So I could have potentially if I wanted to, turned self-switch A off. So he says, "Hey, I'm pleased to meet you," and then I turn it off here, so that way it'll like cycle back and forth between the two. So, you know, there's options. It's cool. I love self-switches, and I cannot stress this enough. Self-switches are what I use all the time to make sure an event only happens once. Like, remember on Route 1 in Red and Blue, the guy's like, "Hey, you know, come to the Viridian City Pokemon Center. Here, I'll give you a free sample," and then he gives you a potion. And then after you talk to him again, he doesn't give you a potion again. Well, self-switches, man. Self-switches. I love it. Okay, so let's take a look at more event stuff. Ooh, I think I'm getting to the best part now. Nice. Okay, so now that we've talked about switches, and now that we've talked about variables, and now that we've talked about self-switches, and we've also talked about conditions, now we get to talk about my favorite thing, conditional branches. So conditional branches are an alternative to the condition thing. So as you've probably noticed right now, these conditions up here, they're not as flexible, right? They can only check if a switch is on. You can't check if a switch is off. They can only check if a variable is a certain number or higher. They can't check if it's a specific number. They can only check if a self-switch is on. They can't check if it's off. So, this is why conditional branches are dope. Okay, so like, let's look at our Koga thing. Remember? He talks to you, and then he turns the self-switch A on, and then he says, "Hey, haven't we already met before?" We could have done that in an alternate way, and I'll show you that with conditional branches. With conditional branches, you don't really need that many event pages. It's just an alternative. I like using conditional branches more, but sometimes event pages are better. It all depends on the scenario. So let's remake that exact Koga conversation, but with conditional branches. So let's do conditional branch. So what a conditional branch is essentially an if statement if you're into programming. And if you're not into programming, or you don't know what an if statement is, it's super simple, honestly. Basically what it does is it does this. If one thing is true, do option A. If that thing is not true, do option B. So basically it says, hey, if self-switch, so basically on conditional branches you can check so much stuff. Oh my god, it's so awesome. You can check switches, you can check variables, you can check timer. I don't ever use timer. But yeah, you can say, hey, if self-switch A is on, which by default it's not, if self-switch A is on, which it isn't right now, he'll say A is on. So if self-switch A is on, he'll say A is on. Else, which means the only other option is self-switch A is off. So he'll say A is off. And then he'll turn A on. So essentially what this logic is doing right now is it checks to see if self-switch A is on. It's not because it's default off. So it doesn't print out the line A is on. It just skips to the else. And then it goes, hey, A is off. And then it turns it on. So that way the next time you talk to him, since A is on, he'll say A is on. If this is going over your head or it's confusing, I'm sorry, but some of these complex are a little more complex. You're going to have to apply some programming concepts. But hey, look, there it's working. A is on. So yeah, so some of these concepts might be a little confusing, but like if you know them and can use them properly, it will make your game making process so much easier. Like conditional branches, I love them so much. There's a reason that I come up to this part of the video and I'm like, oh my god, I love these. I use these all the time. There's so much checking that you have to do in your game. There's so much like logic you have to be prepared for. So use conditional branches. I can't stress that enough. Use conditional branches. If the test switch is off, which it is by default, if test switch is off, he'll say, hey man, switch is off, yo. But if it's on, he'll say, yo, that switch is on. God, I love conditional branches. Okay, so by default, test switch is off. So if I talk to him, hey man, switch is off, yo. And I go over here and he says, hey, I turned the switch on. Yo, that switch is on. See? Oh my god, it's so good. So you use conditional branches all the time in your game to make sure some things happen, some things don't happen. You can control so much with these. There's a couple more things I can talk about. I think I'll make this an extra long video because it's really important to talk about all the event stuff all at once. Yeah, so I told you about why switches are awesome, told you about why variables are awesome, told you about why conditional branches are awesome. They're so awesome. So the next thing I want to talk about is loops. Loops are pretty awesome. They're not as awesome as conditional branches, but they're still pretty dang awesome. So loops ensure that something keeps happening until a choice is made. Like, it basically makes something continue and continue and continue happening until something happens to break it. So typically loops are really useful with show choices to make sure that way, like, let's do an example right now. So the loop will make it so that way it always happens until break loop or exit event processing have been chosen. So the loop will always keep going and going and going and going until you insert a break or an exit event. If you do a loop without any of those, your game is just going to get stuck. So let's make it a loop, and let's make it show text, where he says, will you join me? Like, I'll do a classic example. Remember, like, there's so many games where at the very start they say, hey, do you want to help me out? Yes or no? And you pick no, and they go, hey, come on, be serious. And then they give you the choice again, yes or no. So that kind of like deflates my balloon. You know, I kind of want to... That's a really weird way to word that. But basically, if you choose yes, he'll say, right on. You did it. Cool. And then it'll break from the loop. But if you choose no, then he'll say, come on, please. I always hate it when they do that in video games where it's like a choice but not a choice at the same time. I think I did that once in Pokemon Paradox. It was lame of me. But yeah, so here's how the loop works. You talk and then the loop starts. Will you join me? No. Come on, please. Will you join me? No. Come on, please. Will you join me? See, it's looping and looping right back to the start. So at the very start it said, hey, here's the loop, then it prints out the text, will you join me? Then it shows you the choice. No. Come on, please. And then it restarts the loop. Will you join me? Yes. Right on, you did it! See, loops are really powerful with show choices. Other than that, I can't think of too many great examples to make things loop a whole lot. But I mean, hey, that's up for you to use. I'm just showing you how to use the tools. You can use them how you want. Okay, the next thing that's really cool, it's actually amazingly powerful, is labels. I mean, I didn't really talk about exit event processing, but exit event processing, instead of breaking from the loop, just quits out from the whole event. It's pretty useful if you have a huge event with a ton of loops that's really complex and you just want to get the hell out of there. Whereas break loop only breaks from the one loop. If you have a loop within a loop within a loop, and then it starts getting really complicated to manage break loops, so you might as well just exit event processing right there. So erase event I don't really ever use, because instead of erasing the event, I just make a self-switch, so that way it doesn't happen anymore. I don't really call common events either, so I'll just move to the next thing. Labels. Labels are pretty cool. Essentially, labels are a special line. Like, think of this as a long list of lines, which it really is. and then you make a label line. And we'll call this label line Label 1. Cool. And then if you choose yes, you'll say right on, you did it. And instead of breaking from the loop, actually let's make it break from the loop. And then wait, never mind. Let's see. Okay, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take all of this outside of the loop. Cool. So he says, will you join me? Yes, no. On yes, you say right on, you did it. And then the branch ends. And then, oh yeah, here's what we're gonna do. Let's do this. And then we're going to exit event processing. Okay, cool. So right now what'll happen is he says, will you join me? Yes or no? You say yes. And he says, right on, you did it. And then exit events processing. And then no, come on, please, exit event processing. But with labels, you can jump over lines. That's why labels are cool. Right now, this exit event processing is above label 1, so it'll happen first. Everything underneath exit event processing right now doesn't matter because, you know, I'm not jumping over it. I have to run that line, so it cancels the event. So let's make it so on yes, it will jump to the label, and you have to put the label name. You have to type it exactly correct, the exact same way, and then it'll jump to label 1. And then it'll show the text, hey. So the way that this event works right now is, like, I use label 1 when making super complicated events. You only really need it when you have like tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of lines. But yeah, let's run this. So essentially the way that this should work is if I choose no, it will exit from the event and it won't print out the line saying hey. But if I choose yes, it will jump over the line that would exit the event and then print out, hey, will you join me? No. Come on, please. And then the event exits. Cool. Will you join me? Yes. Right on, you did it. Hey. So jump to label is really good for jumping over lines. I use it when only making really complex events. Let's see now. There's not a whole much more that I can talk about in this episode. This has been like the episode that covers like the most complicated stuff. The next episode will be really easy stuff, relatively. This is going to be the most difficult thing to wrap your mind around. Once you start using this frequently, though, then you'll get the hang of it. I highly, highly, highly recommend just messing around with this stuff. If a switch doesn't work, you know, go back to the drawing board, you know, kind of tweak it a little bit, figure it out. Because once switches, variables, self-switches, and conditional branches, once all of those click, you have so much power at your disposal. It's insane. Like, you can set global variables. You can make certain things happen based on those variables. You can name them anything you want. You can set them to anything you want. There is so much, like, you're only limited by your imagination and your willingness to push on and try new things. So, the next series will cover a couple more event commands. It'll be more about cutscenes. Well, not series, next episode will be more about cutscenes. Because the next page has a lot of really cool cutscene stuff, like set move route. Oh my god, don't even get me started. I love set move route. Not as much as conditional branch, but set move route might be one of the ones that I use one of the events that I use the most. But that's mainly for cutscenes. So yeah, I'll cover all that next time. If you found this episode helpful and you liked it, you know, let me know. If you didn't like it or you found it, you know, confusing and weird, let me know as well. If you have any problems, definitely feel free to hit me up on Twitter or Twitch. I would say if you run into any problems, the best place to contact me is on Twitter. I usually try to get back to people as fast as possible. Usually, you know, sometimes it doesn't happen, but yeah, if you have a really oddly specific problem, let me know. But hey, don't come contacting me if you run into a problem immediately. Just try to figure it out yourself, you know. Try to look at this episode, you know, see the way that events work, see the order of operations, and, you know, it's so gratifying to run into a problem and solve it yourself. So please, 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 please try to event it out and figure it out. And if you can't, I'll always be here to help. So yeah, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on Twitch, and until next time, yeah. Hopefully this episode was helpful. I'm looping now. I need to break from this loop because right now I'm executing. Hey, thank you for watching. Next episode will be cutscenes, and I think the one after that I'll probably talk about picking starters, and then maybe I'll talk about gyms. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. Oh my god! And there's also been a lot of really good requests, and I'll get to all of them, and I'll get to everything next time. This has been a super long episode I've been rambling on. But yeah, thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.